Oh, thanks for coming today, man. Me and my Aunt Helga we were so close. I just can't believe she's gone, man.
Dude, don't worry about it. As soon as you said it was open casket, I was in. You know, I've never seen a dead body before.
Oh, well, I was hoping you were here for the support, but yeah, that's fine.
Oh, well, I am kind of here for the support, but like, where is this body anyway?
It's over there.
All right, let's go check it out.
Okay, let's get to it. Oh, Aunt Helga, so beautiful, so loving.
Wow, she looks so lifelike, doesn't she?
She does.
Hey, watch this. Hello, Wade. I don't love you.
Oh, man, stop doing that. What are you doing? It's my Aunt Helga. She's dead.
Stop being such a pussy. You always wear a pussy.
Oh, God, this is so upsetting. Why, just leave her alone. I'm going to go sit back down.
Oh, it's fine, dude. Just
Aunt Helga,
here.
I miss thee.
Can't believe how real she looks. I want to go and speak to the funeral director about this. How do they get them to look so, well, alive?
What have you done to her face?
I thought you could do it. Oh, dude, I was just trying to make you laugh.
You dried all over her.
It's just a moustache and a pair of glasses.
I can't take it.
It's funny. I bet Aunt Helga would have laughed at it. See? She's laughing.
God, let's get out of here.
All right, let's go speak to that funeral director.
Was to research and try and get a community like it was doing work. I don't want
Sci-gasm. Caleb Wilde is a funeral director from Wilde Funeral Home. That's Wilde with an E. He has written a book, which is available now, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, about his personal experience in the funeral business from even his childhood. We'll get into that in a bit.
Oh, jeez.
He has studied the religious aspects of death as well as mortuary science. He runs a blog discussing all facets of death, and both the blog and book are titled Confessions of a Funeral Director. I encourage everyone to go and check that out. Thank you very much for joining us today, Caleb.
Hey, thanks, Caleb.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
No, not a problem. It was funny, before this interview, I'm like, oh, what's a funeral director like? Like, are they kind of... I was picturing you looking like The Undertaker or something like that. So it's nice to hear you talk about certain aspects of the male body and as a joke, which is great. I'm like, oh, good. He's weird like us, yeah. When it's funny, because when Byrne approached me to do this interview, I'm like, a what? He's like, you know... a person who walks in a morgue. I'm like, what? And we started kind of coming up with some kind of interesting discussions about it. We're like, actually, that's going to be really cool. This person actually sounds really interesting. They're going to know about the body, you know, how to preserve the body, and just, you know, what people's kind of idea about death is. So really looking forward to this.
Yeah, I am too.
All right, well, let's get into it then. So I frankly know bugger all about what happens to the body after we die, and there's a whole range of different things. Like, my mother passed away at the beginning of last year, so her choice on how she wanted to have her remains dealt with, and then, like, I've heard about all these other things. There are so many different ways to, I suppose you'd say, have a good death. What do most people sort of do with their remains? Is it like a burial or a cremation? Is there a majority here, or...?
In the U.S., it's trending towards cremation, but embalming has been the historical tradition for over 100 years, which is what I am. I'm an embalmer, and I'm also a funeral director. So in some states, it's a dual licensure where you have to be licensed as an embalmer and licensed as a funeral director. But in Pennsylvania, where I'm from, home of the 76ers and Ben Simmons, we have... We have the same one licensure, so I'm both funeral director and embalmer.
Oh, the double whammy.
Yeah.
So we're just wondering, like Australia has a much higher rate of cremation because of the lack of burial space. How does that compare in the US? Are you guys like running out of room, or?
Yeah, we aren't. There's still vast amounts of cemeteries that have been designated from a long time ago. A lot of the cemeteries are, at least on the East Coast, which is where I'm from, are church cemeteries that have been around for over 100 years. And it's kind of like walking back into history. You know, you walk back into these cemeteries and the old lots, you see people from the Revolutionary War, you see people from the Civil War, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of, in the U.S., there's a lot of people who are kind of addicted to walking around and looking at the different cemeteries and seeing who they can find.
I do love walking around a cemetery, if I'm honest.
Yeah, but that's for a completely different reason, you creep.
Yeah, hide and go seek. I think I played hide and go seek as a kid in the cemetery, like late at night, because the tombstones make excellent hiding spots. You know, you can kind of like ball up behind one, and you're golden. I mean, nobody will find you. So.
That would freak most kids out. Not you, mate. Not you, Caleb. You're like, I had a picnic there once. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So your experience with the whole death and the funeral industry stems from even your childhood. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like being brought up in a family of funeral directors?
Yeah, I'm kind of a unicorn in that my mother's side and my grandfather's side were both funeral directors. So on my dad's side, my paternal side, I'm a 6th generation funeral director. On my mom's side, I would have been a 5th. So anywhere that I went for holidays, Christmas, Thanksgiving, or the various ones that we get together, I went to a funeral home. So we played hide and go seek in the casket room as well. We'd go over there and we'd eat in one room, and in the very next room there'd be a body laid out in a casket. And as kids, that was kind of just normal. Like, we'd sneak in there and look at the person in the casket, and if we were brave, we might reach out and touch their hands or something like that, kind of study them over. And so it was good and bad. I mean, the good part is that I was pretty serious as a child and pretty fixed on knowing what I wanted, because I realized that one day I was going to die. And on the other side, I think it set me off to be kind of melancholy as well. All the exposure to death that I had as a child.
Yeah, I was just about to ask that. How has that changed your idea of death? Because I think most people fear death, and naturally we kind of obviously try to avoid it.
Yeah.
But how has that changed your idea of death, in that, you know, seeing kind of a body there lifeless?
It was natural. That was the perspective that I had, which I think is a very healthy perspective. And I know I've listened to some of your podcasts, you know, just to get a feel for it. And especially like the atheist perspective, I come from a religious background, but the atheist perspective is rather healthy. You know, to see death as a natural part of life, to see life as the end. Once you die physically, that's it. And those were things that I had rolling around in my head as a very young age, because I saw these corpses. You know, I'd go over and eat our turkey and chicken and mashed potatoes.
Not off a body.
And gravy. No.
I told you end up being weird.
That would come later. So I'd see these things, and I'd walk into the next room and I'd see a dead body, and all these thoughts that swirled around in my head made me pretty motivated to do life the best that I could, and to not waste around with my time and do things that I didn't want to do. So that was good.
It's such a unique situation that you're in.
It is. It's an amazing perspective you've got here, Caleb, that so few people would have the opportunity to even see this. And it's kind of a funny thing. So, like, death is something that most people, by the time they, even in their probably, I don't know, early on, realize it's going to happen. Everyone knows that they're going to die at some point.
Yeah. But
a lot of people have a lot of trouble accepting this. Why do you think so many people have difficulty dealing with something that we all know is unavoidable?
I don't know. I think that we like to believe that we're immortal. For one, we like to... we also have excuses that we use, such as heaven. You know, heaven is the easy button to say, well, yeah, I'm going to die, but then after that, I'll keep going. So death isn't something that I really have to think about, because after it's all done, I'm going to go up in the sky and we're going to have orgies and eat all the pizza that we want while watching our favorite sports. And so,
Wait, stop. That's what happens? Sign me up.
yeah, right.
I'm going to church now. Yeah.
Well, we can start a religion and we can use that as the reward. I think we'd get some pretty quick signups.
I think there's a few people beating you to it, though, mate.
Orgies and pizza does sound pretty terrific.
Yeah, I think
though.
the pizza thing. Yeah. Italian Muslims, maybe? For the
Yeah,
16th
there you go.
Virgins or whatever. And pizza.
I'd prefer to
Oh,
throw
yeah.
in some pot in that mix too. So I don't know what. So Jamaican, Italian, Muslims, we'll have to come up with some
Herb pizza.
combo religion.
It's like a swirl of many cultures, this heaven. I like it.
This
Yeah.
is good. This
it's-
is good, very multicultural. Yeah.
Better as we go.
All we need is a sheep and we've got New Zealand. Yeah, cop that one, New Zealand.
Oh, I'd like to apologise to my Kiwi friends right now. Oh, Jesus.
Oh, none of our friends listen. They stopped listening long ago. Now, speaking of green, we've heard this idea of a green burial, but can you explain what a green burial is? Because, yeah, how do people go green?
I think it's a term that only makes sense when you practice embalming. So, like I said, about 60% of Americans, when they die, right now at least, they'll choose to be embalmed, and that's what I do. So it's if you want me to go into detail, we slice open the neck, and we find the carotid artery. If you put your two fingers on the right side of your neck, you can feel your pulse, and that's the artery that we go for. We have.
Wade's doing it right now.
I'm literally sitting here going, oh, okay, go on.
Yeah. So we go for that. We raise it, which we pull it up, and then we make a little incision in it so that we can fit a tube into the artery. We have a machine that it's basically a pump, a fluid pump, and we turn it on. It pumps the fluid into the artery, and then we also raise the jugular vein, which is usually right next to the carotid artery, and the blood gets pushed out the vein. So we replace the blood with embalming fluid, which makes somebody a lot less likely to decompose quickly. It kind of makes them look better because there's certain coloring agents within the fluid that makes them look like they have a California Kiss suntan. We can do all sorts of things. I really wish they'd come out with a suntan line for embalming fluids. Because there's distinct regions, at least in America. If you want to look like a Floridian suntan, I want the Floridian, Florida, the Floridian line suntan.
If I'm going to go, I want to make it look like I've enjoyed the sun.
Yeah. So we can lighten people if they want to be lightened. We can darken people if they want to be darkened to some extent.
How dark can you get someone? Someone with just regular shade. Can you make him go really dark?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we have coloring agents that are essentially dye. So all we do is we stick a couple drops of the dye into this 2-gallon cylinder, which holds our embalming fluid, and that will be enough to make the body look like it's a little bit, warm, or you right after you've been embarrassed and you get that fleshy look in your face. Just 2 drops of the dye will give that to a body. So if we take the whole thing and we'd pour it in, we'd be talking a purple person.
No, so you mean that if I cut my jeans off and my shirt and stuff like that, I can look like the Hulk?
Sure.
Oh my God!
Yeah,
That would be incredible.
You're running that into your will now, aren't you?
Yeah. That's awesome. Funeral smash. Oh, that'd be great.
Oh, dear. No longer donating my body to science. I'm going out looking like the Hulk.
I'm looking like the Hulk. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, so we do that, and then, of course, when you do that, you're injecting a lot of chemicals, a lot of really strong chemicals into a body. And then when you bury that body, it can maintain its basic shape for decades, even 100 years or more. So there's been, reports like right now, probably if you pulled up Abraham Lincoln's body, Abraham Lincoln was embalmed like 3 or 4 times because he was paraded around the whole United States on a train. They had like this funeral train where they paraded his body city to city, and hundreds of thousands of people viewed his body, but they embalmed him time and time again to keep him looking fresh. I mean, I bet you could dig him up right now and he would look a little bit like a skinny Daniel Day-Lewis. He would probably he'd probably still look good. So you have literally millions of people in the ground who, if
maybe they should do an Abe Lincoln revival tour. Send him around again.
The revival tour. The second
with all original members.
Don't tell me that's not going to sell tickets.
No, dude, I'd pay a lot of money to see that.
Yeah, totally, absolutely.
Pay a lot
That's
of money.
it. Dig him up.
Which has happened. Like a lot of thieves have tried to steal his body initially, so he was like moved all around. But yeah, so you have millions of bodies in the ground that essentially still look the same as the day they were buried. And then on top, Americans are so fearful of decomposition that we put the body in a casket that doesn't allow for anything to come in. It's called a gasketed casket that has a seal around it that makes sure it's basically like Tupperware. And then you put that inside a concrete vault that obviously hardly anything can get into or survive a nuclear war. Thank you, Trump. So yeah, like the only that might survive is all the dead people in America in a couple of years. But they're all perfectly preserved. And the idea of the green movement is to say, hey, we're okay with our bodies decomposing. This is natural. This isn't weird. And what is weird is the fact that you want to keep these dead bodies looking essentially the same for the next 100 years, perfectly preserved in their graves. So we're not going to get embalmed. We're going to be placed in a biodegradable casket, and we're going to let nature take its course. So that's what a green burial is in contrast to the traditional burial here in the U.S.
From a scientific perspective, I like the idea of a green burial because you're kind of returning all the nutrients and chemicals and stuff like that back into the
back to the universe.
Yeah. It eventually will anyway, but it's just a faster process.
I mean, it's only right. We've essentially fucked nature over for 70 plus years. It's only right that we open up ourselves back to nature after we die. Like we're going to 10,000 chicken wings over the span of our adult life. It should make sense that we should be fed to chickens or something of that nature.
Yeah, it is. It's a bit of a final fuck you to nature, isn't it? Like, we've really taken advantage of nature through our lifetime, and then at the end we go, you can't even have us when we're dead.
Yeah. Fuck you, Mother Nature. Yeah. Oh, God.
Just quickly, I want to do a quick shout-out to Cecilia for sending us the idea to do this topic. When she broached us, we thought, what a great idea. And she's even done us a favour and sent us a couple of questions, which brings me to my next question, which comes from her. It was, so how do you deal with the variety of different bodies? So you're going to have people dying at different ages, people obviously different sizes, fat people, skinny people, people at different decomposition rates. You must be pretty right at chemistry, Caleb.
So when I picture an Australian body, I immediately go to like Chris Hemmingsworth, like a perfectly sculpted. Do you guys have fat people in Australia?
Yeah, no, that's pretty accurate. I think we all have bodies like Chris Hemmingsworth. I think,
yeah.
Well,
we are no. I think we're like one of the fattest nations on Earth.
Okay,
I think we're with you guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or it's chicken wings.
Yeah, all the chicken wings and pizza. It is a real problem.
We're in heaven.
Yeah, right. It's a real problem here in the U.S. And so what it can end up doing, in multiple ways. Like, for instance, we had like a 700-pound person, and I don't know the translation of that. So 700 pounds is essentially like 5 adult males.
Just morbidly obese.
Yeah, so they died in a small trailer, and we had to remove the door and remove.
Sorry, we just typed in what 700 pounds is for our Australian listeners, and it is about 317.515 kilograms, which is
That's a monster.
That's
huge,
mate. You're talking about it.
Right.
I mean, a monstrous
Have some
size.
respect.
Right.
Sorry, Caleb.
Right.
Sorry about Byrne.
Right.
Go on.
And the fact is that I do pity the person because they lived a life that was probably incredibly horrible, and they didn't have much choice about it. I mean, I don't think that people who get that big are just sitting around eating McDonald's for the most part. It's probably some type of genetic predisposition that just is absolutely horrible. But it happens a lot here in the U.S. where we have people who are morbidly obese, and it does create a lot of problems from not only like where do you get a casket that size, or there's literally crematories that are made just for that type of person, because if you were to take that type of person and put them in a regular crematory, it would melt the fat, would be one option, or it would start a huge, what is essentially a grease fire. Yeah. So
Wow. Oh my God.
And those are the two like real things that happen if you don't have the right crematory. One, you'll put it on low, and it will melt the person, and so you'll literally have the retort, which is the actual machine, seeping the remains of somebody that large, or you'll go the other possibility and you'll start a fire. And so you'll see those things. I think one happened here in the U.S., but before that, there was a really bad one in Germany about 2 or 3 years ago where the whole place burnt down. So there's that, and there's different stages of decomposition, like you said. Like if somebody dies in their home and they're a loner, they don't have any friends, the only way that it'll be known that this person has died is probably the stench. So that's a problem. And when we have that, there's no way that we can embalm a body. I mean, once a body starts to decompose, it's pretty much impossible to perform any of our embalming techniques.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it must be confronting though. Like, it might be, but do you, like, say if you get a child come through or someone who's of a young age, surely that must kind of, trigger some sort of emotional response in you, or do you just kind of view the body as, well, it is what it is and it's lifeless and I need to do my job? Like, is there any attachment you have to seeing something that's quite confronting?
Yeah, I think so. The burnout rate for funeral directors in the United States is about 70% within the first 10 years. So 70% of the people who enter the industry will be out of it within 10 years. And that was close to being me because of the death of children. There's no way around it. And now that I have a son of my own, it's actually become more difficult. So, you always try to balance your humanity as well as your business acumen when you're a funeral director. Obviously, you're not just there giving out free funerals. You're also attempting to run a business, but you're also a human, and people need to see that you are feeling with them, that you're walking the path with them, that you have compassion, that you're incarnating their story into yourself, that it's becoming part of you. But when it's a child, I pretty much warn my wife when we have a child that dies, and just let her know I'm going to be an asshole for the next week because I'm going to be wrestling with these things and I'm seeing things that I shouldn't be seeing on a regular basis, and just have patience with me. So when I first started, I never said that, and that was like that was bad for myself personally and bad for my marriage. I just thought that I could plow right through my emotions and be okay on the other side. But I've learned that I have to prepare myself and I have to prepare people around me, because there's no way you can plow through it, and there's no way you can do it without being touched. So that's tough.
Okay. And how many days does the embalming process take? Like, what's the time period? Because you're saying there for about a week. Like, is it something where you walk in, get it done, and then leave the room, or does it take a number of days?
It depends. So, yes, mostly just one day. Now, sometimes we go back, and within that day, it just takes about 3 to 4 to 5 hours, depending on the specific case. If the case has been autopsied, it's a little bit more problematic because they've removed the center of distribution, which is the heart. So once you remove the heart, then I have to raise arteries 2 in the head and 1 for each extremity. That takes longer. And then I have to revisit it later on because maybe there's something that I missed, or maybe there's a part that was short-circuited because an artery was messed up in the foot, and the foot didn't get the fluid that it was supposed to receive, so I have to revisit that foot with some topical injections, which is basically a large syringe that I put in there and put embalming fluid in. So, yeah, generally like only 3 to 6 hours, but if a family wants a body to be held for quite some time, then I'll probably revisit my work and make sure that everything was distributed properly.
Okay. Oh.
Well, I know we've got a lot of samples and things, so animal samples, and we use formaldehyde to preserve them, and they can stay for years and years and years. Do you guys use formaldehyde in your embalming fluid?
Yeah, it's a mixture. So there's
Okay.
a bunch of different things within our fluid. There's the dyes, that make the skin a certain color. There's probably about 5 other things that I'll save your listeners from hearing so I don't bore them. But it's this concoction, and some of these concoctions are like homemade recipes. Like you go back, there's actually a book. It's like home cooked embalming fluids, where the first generation of embalmers all had like their personal brew. So it was like small brewers for beer, except with embalming fluid. And these guys were renowned for their specific brand. And so those things have kind of been passed on and refined and looked at by people much smarter than most funeral directors. And so we have what we have today. But yeah, at one point it was like every funeral director had their own concoction, and formaldehyde was essentially the base.
Did any funeral directors emerge as like the Colonel Sanders with their 11 secret herbs and spices? Or became quite popular?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. How exactly does the stuff work as a preserving agent? What does it do to stop decomposition?
Yeah, so I'm not a scientist, but the way that it's been explained to me, which is extremely dumbed down, is it essentially has the same
Thank
effect.
you for that.
Yes. As
You're going to love our show then.
if you put an egg on a skillet, so embalming fluid essentially hardens things so that it's less susceptible to the breakdown from microbes. So you put an egg on a skillet, it hardens, or you hard boil an egg, and that egg now will last a little bit longer than an egg that's not hard boiled. So we're essentially hard boiling and pickling humans is what we're doing. Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it.
It's kind of funny because
Pickle Rick. Yeah.
Pickle Rick, yeah, Pickle Rick. So you kind of speak of death, like and the preserving of bodies, and you, like I don't know, Byrne and I would kind of look at like you speak of it as if it's like some sort of art. It adds this color to it, adds that color. Do you think death is art or a science?
Yeah, it's both, for sure. We've lost the art of it. There's a lot of practices throughout the world that still retain some degree of the art of dying. You look at Mexico and Dia de los Muertos. There's some other cultures, and most of these cultures, we look at these traditions as archaic.
Sorry,
and
that's Day of the Dead, Wade. He's looking at me very confused
yes.
right now.
So, yeah, Day of the Dead, they like make these candies that look like skulls. They make candies that look like hearses. And I don't know what you guys call them, hearses in Australia. The coaches that carry the deceased to a cemetery, they basically celebrate their dead. But what it is it's almost like sticking the middle finger to death. So it's based off this idea that we die twice. We die physically once, and then we die a second time the last time somebody speaks your name. So their idea for this holiday is to stick their middle finger to death and say, look, the second death is not going to happen to our loved ones. We're going to speak their name and we're going to celebrate it. So that's an art. That's an art that most communities don't even think about, because I think for the most part we categorize it as something that's, like I said, archaic, and something that is superstitious, and there's superstition involved, where there's the belief that there's two different realms, and during that time the spirits of the dead come back to dwell with the living, etc., etc. But I still think we can find value in a modern society from these ancient traditions, because there's art to them. There's truth to some of these things that seem to us like they no longer apply. And I'd love to see some of that back in our traditions, where we honor the dead a little bit more. We still speak their name. There's this idea like once somebody dies, it's taboo to talk about them. At least that's the way it is in the U.S., because we assume that people should be going towards closure, where you're done with the grief, and that's the healthy thing to do. Once you're done with the grief, you've moved on, and now you can live your life like normal. So that's not coming through, is it? So that's
no, you're good.
That's wrong. Closure's a myth. Grief is not linear; it's cyclic. And to think that we can just get through it and in a year's time be done with it is not only a myth in itself, it's unhealthy. So talking about our dead and actually celebrating them and forestalling that second death, I think is something as an art that we need to try and reinvent, re-narrate, and reapply into the way that we deal with death. And if we do that, it makes death less scary. Like if you every year you remember your mom on a specific day, right? And you guys talk about her, you bring up all the memories that you had, you talked about what she loved, the things that made you love her. It brings her back, it brings our loved ones back on that day. And if we do that from like childhood on up, like some cultures do, I think we'd be less afraid when the time comes, and more apt to talk about it and to deal with it like it's a natural thing, and as opposed to think it's something that is just all natural and shouldn't happen to me because I'm an American.
America.
So I think it's both, and for us, there's a scientific part, where we have to look at the body and analyze it, and then go appropriately.
And make sure you don't start a grease fire.
That's right. One more thing in the vein of dick jokes. So there is a phenomenon called postmortem priapism. And there's other terms for this, angel lust or death erection. So when somebody dies a violent death, generally through asphyxiation or something of that manner, it does happen where the deceased will have angel lust or a death erection. In fact, and this is an interesting piece of history, part of some of the artists during the Renaissance actually depicted Jesus with an erection on the cross. Now, I believe those paintings have gone the way of everything. I don't think they exist anymore, but they did exist.
Well, they're angel boners.
Yeah, angel lust, angel boners.
Amazing. I don't know. If I saw a corpse with a burner, I'd be like, well, clearly he went out doing what he loved. You know?
Yeah, that's actually the right way to die. When we talk about a good death, that's the good death.
Oh my god, that's amazing.
Hulk erect. So you're telling me I could look like the Hulk and have a boner when I die? This death scene is not as scary as I originally thought.
No one's going to notice your boner, though.
Yeah.
I was a woman, yeah. That's so cool. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I've never seen it, but I know it exists. You can Wikipedia it, and you can look up the Renaissance.
I'm not looking that up. I'm sorry.
Fuck that, I'm looking that up.
Incognito.
Incognito, yeah.
Right. Crucifixion paintings as well of Jesus with the crucifixion hard. So
nice.
there you go.
Nice. That's so cool. And I also think as well, you not seeing it's probably a good thing. It's probably what's kept you in the industry so long. It's like, will today be the day I see a dead guy get a boner?
That's right. I'm out of this now. I don't want to do this job anymore.
Like, you probably find that you would come home from like something like that and be like, well, looks like I've got to quit my job now. I've seen it all. So.
Yeah, I don't think that would be a dinner topic. Sitting around with the family.
How was work today, Daddy? Well, let me tell you something.
It was hard, son. It was very hard.
We had this one stiff that was extra stiff.
Oh, that's amazing.
All right, well, Caleb, thank you very much for joining us today, making death a little less scary and about 1,000 times more interesting. I learned a lot from that. That was fantastic.
That was rad. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes.
That was so interesting. That's something I've never known, so it was awesome.
Yeah.
And it's pretty cool because I'm like talking into the future, right? You guys are Wednesday and I'm Tuesday. So we're like time traveling while we do this podcast.
Well, so far Wednesday's quite sunny, Caleb. I think you'll enjoy Wednesday. It's been a good day so far.
Yeah,
good.
I think you'll enjoy yourself. Yeah.
But I'd encourage all of our listeners out there.
On Wednesday yet? America
not
still
yet, not yet.
exists.
But it is. It's just gone past 7 a.m., so there's still time. It's still early.
Good.
All of our listeners out there, you can check Caleb out online. He hosts a blog, Confessions of a Funeral Director, and his recent book by the same name is available online from all bookstores and as an ebook as well. I'd encourage everyone to go and check that out. It's a really interesting read, and there's some really interesting stuff from a really interesting guy that's been around death for his whole life. There's a perspective most of us will never get. Yeah. Thanks very much for joining us, Caleb.
Thank you for having me.